the rest of the people at the table, please.
Sure. Jose Madrigal, City Manager.
Mark Morgan, City Attorney.
Erin Hyder, Assistant City Manager.
Thank you guys for joining us, as always. And we will start with a review of the agenda, council agenda. We will not have a study session at our next meeting on September 19th. So councilors, do we have any items that we would like to review for future agendas? Okay, seeing none. I'll be looking at you like this, Olivier. Well, he was there. Okay, good. All right. Then we'll move on to discussion regarding the Financial Advisory Board prioritized proposed 2024 Department Capital Projects budget with Devin. Is she?
Yes, Devin Schmidt. Fab Board, already moving. Oh, not. So Devin Schmidt will be doing the review of the Financial Advisory Board prioritized 2024 department capital budgets and their recommendations that went through. And we will go and continue through the study session afterwards.
And just a reminder to council and Mark Morgan, I'm sure will keep us on track, but it's just for, this is updates only. No direction, no decisions will be made. Thank you.
And before I get started, if I may, I know the downtown's next step consultant is here and does have a hard stop at 4.
Oh.
Do we want to, I mean,
Sure.
I'm
That's
I'm
fine with
here
me
all
if that's
night,
okay with the
so-
council.
It's fine with me.
Sure.
Yes. Great.
You
Okay,
may-
so we will switch then. We'll start with downtown next steps update. Thank you.
Just rearranging our agenda so that we can have plenty of time for the consultant.
Thank you, guys. When you get seated, I'll have you speak into the mic, your names and position, please.
Okay, Mayor and Council, sorry for that bit. I'm pretty sure I think there was an email, Sarah, that you sent about that, and I completely missed it. So my apologies. But this was at a request of, I believe it was Councilor Bosman's and Councilor Ziazi in regards to, and then the entire council in regards to just having an informational update in regards to the steps that we have taken with Downtown Next Steps and kind of a project update. So we have the team here to kind of give a overview of where we've been, where we're at, and where we're continuing to look to go. And I will pass that on to Sarah if you'd like to introduce the consultant.
Sure. Jose took my entire slide, so I'm Sarah Hill, Transportation Director, and our team today is Devin King, our multimodal administrator who you know, Savannah Lytle. She was really instrumental in the community outreach portion of the concept of the project. So she's going to give a background and a refresher of what that process looked like. And then we have Ellie Schaefer, who is the consultant from MIG, who is hired to help us through the engineering design phase. And then, of course, just wanted to highlight that this project hits a number of the strategic goals, mainly in the effective infrastructure network to improve safety and connectivity for all modes, to design all of our improvements to maximize safety, innovation, accessibility, and resident satisfaction, to advance community accessibility and walkability, and then also enhancing our livability and sense of place and supporting economic vitality of our downtown businesses. So I'm going to hand it over to Devin King, or sorry, Savannah Lytle, to get started with kind of just a brief history.
Yeah, so I'll give a brief history of how we came to Downtown's Next Steps. This is really the implementation of multiple adopted city plans, starting in 2006 with Downtown Durango's vision and strategic plan. And then the goals and objectives of this plan were really to maintain that activity at the ground floor level and also provide and encourage more accessibility for walking and biking and public transportation. The recommendations that came out of this plan were to convert Main to 3 lanes, which we saw happen, and then provide the wider sidewalks and consider bulb outs, improve the streetscape, and really provide this opportunity for more outdoor space on downtown Main Avenue. This was then followed with followed by multimodal transportation plan adopted in 2016, followed by the 2017 Durango Comprehensive Plan, And both of these, again, encourage that multimodal accessibility downtown. Also really to encourage placemaking, which is this holistic approach towards enhancing existing and creating new places that build community while also preserving our identity of distinctive places. And it also, the goal of the comprehensive plan was to really provide that space that would activate and create the sense of place and identity in our main downtown. And really, it is our living room. And how do we continue to maintain that and provide accessibility for everyone? We then, in 2021, Multimodal Advisory Board prioritized the project for safety and accessibility improvements. Again, that focus on multimodal accessibility downtown. In 2021, at the end of 2021, November, and then the early part of 2022, community engagement process started. And this is when we hired MIG to help with this process and identify the vision of the community for their downtown. And from that then informed the conceptual plan for Main Avenue. This year also, or 2022, council adopted the funding for phase 1 design. And then that phase 1 design, the surveys, engineering began in 2023.
So I'll just go over the project purpose. Samantha covered it quite a bit, and as did Sarah, but, looking at essentially 3 different components: improving safety and accessibility. And when we say accessibility, the first thing that pops in your head, of course, is ADA accessibility, but there's more to it than just that. It's also bike accessibility, it's parking, it's getting people to where they're going. It's not just specifically ADA accessibility, and economic vitality of the downtown Main Avenue area. And so, with that, we're talking about expanding and improving pedestrian trails to making that sidewalk larger. For example, I was up in Breckenridge this weekend and lots of activity going on, but it was pretty hard to navigate getting around down there. Improving safety along the corridor. So again, we'll talk about crashes that we have data from the Durango Police Department. And we'll hit on that a little bit, but also, shortening crosswalks and looking at just, is this a comfortable space for everybody? And then proactive streetscape enhancement. So this is, whether we're talking about the ability for people to put in patios in front of their restaurants or businesses, and then also, potential enhancements when it comes to water quality and other utilities within the ground. Sorry, one too many. So going in a little bit deeper on the safety need, as I mentioned, we do have that data from the Durango Police Department, which highlights 399 total crashes within that corridor within a 10-year time period. 22 of those were pedestrian, 6 were bicycle, and 17 were injuries. There is a lack of traffic calming, so just a reminder, traffic calming or things in the roadway, basically having the roadway designed to go a certain speed limit and to speeds, make people drive less aggressively. And some of those traffic calming elements that we're proposing in the design are things like curb extensions or bulb outs, which essentially is just where that curb comes out. But other things can act that way, which is trees, having crosswalks, signage, pedestrian vulnerability. Right now, if you think about the roadway as it is, it's a very wide road, right? It's intended for wagons to turn around. It's got essentially 3 lanes plus you have the 2 parking parallel spaces on each side. So when you think about that, it's a lot of roadway to cross, which just puts a pedestrian in that much more time that they're in the roadway and vulnerable to vehicles. And then going into accessibility, again, as I kind of mentioned, non-ADA compliant curb ramps. And so even with non-compliant or ADA curb ramps, again, the thought goes straight to someone who's in a wheelchair or in a walker, but what often gets left out is, folks pushing their kids in strollers, even younger kids with tripping hazards and just regular adults. So want to think holistically about that ADA component. For transit stop accessibility, right now it's not very easy for a transit bus to pull up alongside the curb so that it's easier for folks to get on and off. Few accessible parking spaces. This is something that's come up quite a bit, including during our conceptual design was a lack of ADA accessible parking. So in the few locations that there are ADA accessible parking, there may not be a easy accessible ramp nearby. So looking at that. And then of course the longer crosswalks, which I touched on under the pedestrian vulnerability hardware. And then economic vitality, necessary utility upgrades. We're going to touch on this a little bit later. Patio space out in front of the businesses, and then the welcoming street character. So again, it's just, is this a space that's inviting to everybody, or is it exclusive of some folks? And on that, I will pass it on.
So in 2021, as I mentioned, was the beginning of our community outreach and public engagement for this process. We really wanted to get a large voice on this. As mentioned, it is our living room. And so there were 19 total bid and/or city-led meetings. We started out with a questionnaire that we put out also as bilingual. Our efforts were bilingual for Spanish speakers. And we wanted to really understand the community's vision and their values for downtown. So then that would inform our vision statement as well as the conceptual plans that we put out there. Once we had our conceptual plans, we held another community open house, as well as put a survey out to understand what people liked about the conceptual plans. Were there aspects that they liked and aspects that they didn't like? Ellie and I even went to a coffee shop and sat there with the plans to talk to folks personally to understand what they really related with on these conceptual plans. So there were the 2 online questionnaires with over 2,000 responses. 168 of those were business owners. And then once we took those conceptual designs, we then formed our final conceptual design, which then we put online for review and also held an open house for folks to give feedback on that final conceptual design. And so it was very interesting on our first questionnaire where we had over 900 people respond, is that really what they wanted to see was that activation of public space, that they wanted more outdoor patios, they wanted more seating, they wanted more trees, they wanted places where they could gather and have those casual interactions that really define our community. When you see somebody that goes to your son's school and you can say hi because you can see them downtown sitting and enjoying their coffee outside. So that was very important. The other piece that came out as well was, as Devin mentioned, is that accessibility in all aspects, whether you're on your bike or walking or on transit. And so those were the 2 pieces that largely came out of this, and was to create those public spaces and those public gathering spaces. And a lot of us immediately go to those outdoor restaurants, and cafes and patios, but that's not it. It's also just places for people to sit and gather. If we think of Maria's with our bump outs, that bump out is almost always occupied because people want to sit and rest. If you provide seats, people will come and have that little bit of green space. It's a little oasis downtown. And so when we say public gathering spaces, we don't mean the formal outdoor restaurant patios necessarily for that. So that was our public outreach. And then Ellie talked about our conceptual design.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Ellie Schaefer with MIT. Nice to see many of you again. So as Savannah mentioned, the conceptual design is balancing a lot of elements that can fit in the street. We only have so much width in the public right of way. Early on, I think earlier in other city planning efforts, as well as in our engagement, there's a strong proponent of folks who are really interested in a pedestrian mall. So actually closing the street to cars altogether and pedestrianizing, making it a large plaza space. We also, on the other side of the spectrum, had a large group in the community that, don't really want to see much change from what's out there today, even if that's, improving the sidewalks, tearing the street up to fix utilities, that type of thing. So we're balancing some different perspectives and experiences within our downtown community. So ultimately where the conceptual design landed is what we think is a really happy middle ground. So it still allows for cars to travel down the street in the same traffic configuration. So still 3-lane roadway, still has on-street parking. But at the same time, we're expanding the sidewalk, expanding through bulb outs and shrinking the size of the lanes a little bit to really be able to allow for more public life, like Savannah's been talking about, on the street. Balancing all modes and all users in the downtown is sort of where the design has landed. So we started the engineering design portion of this in early 2023. So when we say engineering design, it's really kind of taking that conceptual design to the next level and getting it all the way through to what's called construction documents. So the street can actually then be built. So before doing the actual detailed design itself, there's a lot of upfront legwork that has to be done. So over the last several months, we've been working on all these things listed on the screen. I'll point out a few of the bigger ones. Topographic surveying. We didn't have as-built drawings for the corridor. So in order to do that detailed engineering design, we have to have that existing condition drawn to start from. So we had crews out there doing the surveying work. We also needed to map subsurface utilities. So we have a team of 4 sub-consultants in addition to MIG on this project. So our another team of engineers was out there working with the city to identify where are those utility lines that are underground today, where are those different connections into the building and so forth. Geotechnical field work, so looking at the soils and making sure that the design is going to be structurally sound for the roadway itself. ADA analysis, Devin spoke a lot about. So we've looked into, what are the safety hazards that are out there today for traffic, for folks of all abilities, and how can that be improved through the design. Several other items on this screen. I guess the only one I'll point out is the tree inventory. So there's a lot of great trees downtown. They vary in age, maturity, health, and species. And so that was a big thing, was to figure out, okay, what are all the trees that are out there? And how are we going to factor those into an expanded curb? So, so we completed all those steps for the entire corridor, all 9 blocks downtown. And then the intent is to actually do the detailed design in phases, just based on available funding. Also, the construction is proposed to be in phases as well. So what we're going to be doing next is hopefully designing for 2 full blocks of the corridor. The more we can design at once, there's efficiencies there to, connect from block to block and not have it be sort of a piecemeal effort. The other thing that kind of comes with this first phase of design is some steps that we don't really need to repeat later on. So things like picking out a material palette, picking out new furnishings, benches, trash, recycling, containers, those sort of things that will then continue on the rest of the corridor. So there's some of that upfront legwork that we're going to be doing in this first portion of design. We've also been coordinating with the utility and public works departments. So we are factoring in water quality. There's an opportunity with this design to capture stormwater runoff and filter it through bioretention planters, which ultimately is going to lead to less pollution into the Animas River. So there's a really great opportunity as water flows through downtown to help capture and treat it on Main and increase the landscaping at the same time.
Thanks, Ellie.
Mhm.
So kind of touching on some of the components that Ellie just brought up regarding utilities coordination. I know that we've kind of mentioned earlier in the slides. Originally, this project wasn't looking at utilities. I mean, every time we do a multimodal project, we do map where the utilities are, but that's, for landscaping purposes. Also knowing, what's going on with what. However, during this project, it's come about throughout the years that it's important to coordinate with utilities anytime we do a roadway project, because otherwise we do a roadway project and then all of a sudden we have to go and replace utilities and tear everything up and just it. And so, I know that we've had neighborhoods in the past that have not been very excited about that occurring. So we have started a capital improvement project coordination team. And so we meet often and there's a department and during that time, we all talk about, the different projects going on within the city, and we look at, okay, if we're doing a roadway project in that area, are there utilities replace, or is this a good opportunity? And so with this, some of the things that came up with utilities specific to downtown is currently a lot of them are, the water line specifically is daisy chained. So bring up a business more recent, which is fired up. There was coordination between, I think, a new water valve or something of that sort that was needed to put in. And so to do that, shut off water to multiple businesses downtown and just didn't affect only one business. So there's opportunity for there that will also improve those businesses. Few water main valves requiring water shut off areas. Again, kind of that similar coordination. Anytime there's something that needs to be fixed downtown right now, the way things are set up, it causes disruption to multiple businesses, not just one. And then as Ellie was talking about, upgrading the stormwater for water quality into the river. So right now in downtown, there's not that much water quality that is done. So, to Ellie's point, most of when we get a big rain, anything that's on that road is washing down into the river. So there's opportunities there to also improve our river and natural environment. So then getting into the design cost, as Savannah earlier pointed out, the original budget that was approved in 2022 was $400,000. We had 2 design bids that we received in August when the city advertised for this project, and they were about $1.1 to $1.2 million. And so looking at that, we talked to the multimodal advisory board, and staff went to the multimodal advisory board and said, hey, we've gotten 2 bids for this and they're significantly over. And the idea that MAB recommended to city council was to design in phases. And with that, the idea was to do a full corridor analysis. So we brought that to city council, and that was back in November of last year, and discussed this proposal as how to move forward. And so, as Elliot pointed out, we have done essentially that full corridor analysis so that we know how everything will work together. And we're doing this as a holistic project, not just one separate block, and then all of a sudden things don't work together. So we know how the full corridor will look and work. However, we do have to still do some hard engineering and actually going in there and saying, okay, well, this curve right here is not to this length, trees right here, etc. So that is the 2 blocks that we're hoping to fully design full construction at this point in phase 1. And to do that, some of the things like water quality and some of that full corridor analysis we did ended up being a larger portion of that original design budget of $400,000. So we are looking at an appropriation request for $120,000. So the plan right now is to bring that back in September. And what that would be to fully design 2 blocks for construction. And then the rest of the design will happen, we'll basically just move north. So right now we're looking at the 600 and 700 blocks, and that went through a lot of staff analysis and just looking at, okay, where are highest crashes on the corridor? Also, where's the busiest areas? Where is the gateway? So if we think about it, there's kind of a north and south gateway being College essentially into downtown. And so that's how we ended up with the 600 and 700 blocks. But yeah, 2024 next steps would be to design further north on the blocks. And at this point, I don't have a specific number for those blocks, but that is currently in the budget at $450,000 for 2024. So with that ends the presentation. Open for questions.
Can we do questions?
Yes.
Absolutely. If you're all done with the presentation, thank you so much. I'm sure we have questions. Yes, absolutely. Gil, do you want to start?
Okay, I just have a few. Let me think. Okay, Ellie, I was wondering when you mentioned that you put out 19, you received 19 surveys. You also included the bid. Do you have the number without the bid, only city generated surveys?
You're talking, it's about the questionnaires that we sent out, the 3 questionnaires that we sent out.
No, the total, you said that you had put out 19 meetings and surveys. And I want to know what was generated from the city of Durango, without the bid, the business district? Because you had that noted up on your PowerPoint.
We had the 3 community open houses. We had one, what we call business hours, when people could come and talk to us one-on-one. And the rest were a combination with bid.
Okay,
the
so,
3 community open houses.
okay, so the city had 6. Thank you for that answer. Okay, so also I was wondering
Wait,
about,
I think they're confused.
Yeah, so there were.
how could they be?
So there were 3 community open houses, right? And then the 6 stakeholder meetings, are those, is that the 9? Is that correct?
Well, if you want to go back to your PowerPoint, it stated that a combination of the bid, what is the Business Improvement District and the City of Durango combined, you had 19 meetings. I want to know what the meetings total was just for the City of Durango without the Business Improvement District.
9.
9? Okay.
Since she's asking that question on numbers for the survey, can I follow up to that?
Okay, go ahead.
And then you can go from there, because I did have a question on that. On the conceptual feedback slide, where you said that 77% of the people wanted more outdoor patios in those same numbers. So you said you had almost 2,000 community feedback hits. About of the 77% includes like what number out of how many people is this?
So this one came from the first questionnaire we did, which we had 938, I believe.
Okay, that's
respondents.
right. I think I remember that. Okay.
With math, we just rounded it up to 1,000, and you wanted to do 77% of that.
Got it. That makes
That's what I
sense.
would do. So the results that we're showing here are from that first questionnaire.
But a good amount of people, which is, I mean,
Yes.
is that statistically significant?
Yes. We were hoping for 300 people to respond, so we were very excited when we got 900.
Great. Excellent. Thank you.
Go ahead. Let's see. Okay, so also Ellie, on your presentation actually was very good, and I thought it went really well from beginning to end. But I did have one question about, your focus was on creating a sense of identity and place. And I was wondering if you considered the identity of historic downtown Colorado, and if you also considered the fact that we are listed on the historic register to maintain the character of downtown Durango. And I wonder whose identity and place did you focus on? Did you focus on, say, somebody like me with my identity of place, or did you just focus on contemporary Durangoites?
These are 2 questions. I'll answer both these. These are great questions, and I'm glad that you brought them up. So yes, downtown Main Avenue, Durango is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. So that normally would not have protection. But what Durango did is pass an ordinance that does put that into place, a protection, as well as design guidelines that were adopted by City Council to protect those historic buildings. So downtown's next steps are from building front to building front, so they will not impact the historic character. And we will ensure that also any improvements would not impact someone's ability to identify and understand the historic character or character defining features of those buildings. That is very important and key to this entire project. So we will not impact our historic buildings or their historic fabric and character defining features of those buildings. On that, with our sense of place and sense of identity, it is our community. It is not one person's sense of place or sense of identity. It is us as a whole. Who are we as the city of Durango? What is our identity? What is our story? What are we trying to tell? And so that's why we sent out this questionnaire, multiple questionnaires, and had these multiple meetings, is that we want to understand who we were collectively. Who are we as the city and our sense of place? And so it's not one person, it's multiple as a community. And that's why we made sure that we had multiple stakeholders and that these were bilingual surveys and we had translators at meetings, is because we didn't want it to just be one person, but multiple as a city.
Yeah, and I guess just to add on to kind of the first comment regarding the improvements, one of the things we've been talking about even is, any spot that we're going to be talking about new trees or moving existing trees and like, maintaining that current view shed that we have when you go downtown. I know a lot of people talk about it, and to bring up the Strader Hotel, right? And we're like, well, I mean, probably the Strader doesn't want trees right here. And, a lot of people, you always see people there at the corner taking pictures of the Strader. And the goal is not to change the viewscape of downtown. It's really to make these improvements, about at the 6-inch level and really provide that safety and I guess sense of place that Savannah had been kind of talking about.
Okay, so I was also curious, I wasn't involved when this project found its legs, and I'm concerned because I think the character and historic value of downtown Durango is what drives tourists here to shop, and people like to drive in and park and go in and eat and dine. We've done that forever. So I'm wondering if this plan is to move forward with doing 2 blocks at a time. And we're looking, 4 or 5 years, whenever this gets rolling, 4 or 5 years out, we're going to always be in a continuous 2 blocks, 2 blocks, 2 blocks, for multiple years. And at the same time, we don't know how the inflation is going to affect the price of goods. And we also know the fact that we have supply chain shortages, and we also have labor shortages. And it's hard to get projects done here because contractors will not move their big equipment in because they have them on a rotating priority list when they're going to move their equipment in. So do you think that this project is actually feasible by what you have down on your funding strategy? And do you know if we're going to stick to, say, on this chart I have, like 2017, you're budgeting $693,000. This came from you, but so are we going to go like, $600,000 for the next 4 or 5 years?
So
That's going to be the total cost?
I guess right now what we have is we have design kind of broken out into phases. At this point, we do not have construction scheduled or budgeted. So we have design, and our proposal at this point is, again, the original 2 bids that we got were about 1.1 to 1.2 million. And so with this first phase, we're only doing 2 blocks, but that's partially because we, did all the extra legwork up front for the full corridor. So next phase would actually probably be more blocks, not just 2. It could be, I don't want to, LA being, I don't know, 4 to 6 blocks, who knows? I think we'll just have to see how much that costs. But the idea is that we would do the design in 3 phases to kind of fully complete, which would be that 1.1 to 1.2 million estimate that we received. So that's what we're working off of right now for design. And then for construction, that's coming up in the future. And at this point, we don't have it necessarily budgeted for. And
All right.
I guess I don't know.
Did I just have one more last question? Okay, so the design sounds and the concept at one point sounded, really great. But as things change and the economy changes, and sometimes the people in the survey change also. So I'm wondering, when you're looking at this design, did you happen to think about the fact that separating out just the design features and what's going to make it look larger sidewalks and possibly, beautifying downtown and the ADA, apart from the infrastructure issues under the road? Because, once you start digging something up, you're going to find railroad tracks, the train went down Main Street. You're going to find abandoned gas and water lines. And according to Devin, not every building has their individual shutoffs. You know, so that's also going to be a multiple problems. And then you're going to be finding when you dig into the sewer, the clay pipes are going to crumble and you may have to dig another 20 feet to do the repair. You know, so is there some way to separate that out? Because, you know, if all of those are included in the next step project, I mean, this thing's going to cost like way more than $1.4 million.
Yeah, so again, right now, these specific design costs are just for the roadway improvements, but we have been doing, we've been working with the utility department and they are doing investigation of the utilities, and that's actually a separate piece to this. So that includes cammering, going down there, actually looking at what is the existing infrastructure look like, and they're also looking at, okay, they're doing design for rebuilding it. And I'm sorry, I'm looking at Justin over there because he's part of the utility.
Yeah, I mean, it's a big deal.
Yeah, and Justin, I don't know if you have any more to add to that conversation.
And while Justin is getting seated, I would just say that these are currently two separate projects, and the utilities piece of it was introduced as an efficiency element to the project, like Devin was talking about with, just working collaboratively with other departments and finding opportunities to improve the entire roadway, but they are separate projects. So I hope that that's clear.
Yeah, so I think Devin did a great job of explaining what the benefits are of attacking the utilities, the subsurface improvements before the surface improvements. And we've been working with BHI to get a design done. And we have an engineer's opinion of probable cost. So just a big round number of around $2.5 million for the entire corridor, 5th to 14th. And if we add on construction management contingency of what we're going to find underneath the streets, and also if we're attacking 2 blocks at a time, just the consumer price index increasing costs year over year, 3.5 is kind of what we're looking at. But this is 30% conceptual, big round number.
And, Justin talked about BHI, so that's also that's one of the sub-consultants for the other part of the design, for the streetscape part of the design. So, trying to work hand in hand together so that we really understand what's going on. And then you kind of brought up the railroad, or I guess the old streetcar lines underneath the road. And one of the things that we've also been doing is, trying to figure out, well, where are, some of the old coal chutes, where are the basements? So we've been, putting that into the survey as well. And, noting that, this portion of the sidewalk, we may have to be a little more creative in how we do it. It may not be a sidewalk that we can rip up because there is a coal chute or a basement. So we can expand upon that sidewalk and make improvements. And that's something that we also found out when the city originally updated sidewalks back in 2007, 2008. So.
I'm good.
When you guys are talking about, sorry, can I?
Oh, yeah.
You didn't
Yeah.
even tell me to speak.
Go
Can I-
for
Sorry. Okay.
good.
When you guys are talking about the tree inventory, are you planning in the outdoor patios more space for or the community gathering spaces, more trees, adding in more trees and green spaces than
Yeah.
already there? Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think there's an opportunity for that. And we'll have to figure out in the design how to balance where the trees are, because with the expanded sidewalk, the curb will be a few feet farther out. And so the existing trees kind of land in the middle of the sidewalk, which can create a really interesting condition. And, we want to preserve the trees as much as we can, of course, but we're also starting to think like, all right, transitioning over time, when new trees are planted, maybe they make more sense up closer to the curb and what have you. But yeah, especially with the curb bulb outs, those are going to be like the main location where we're planting new trees.
I just gotten a bunch of community feedback on Durango Next Steps and making sure we're trying to incorporate more instead of less, which is great.
Yeah.
In line with Councillor Yazzi's comment, the phase construction, that was initially because of businesses downtown not wanting the entire main avenue. And that's why we went there. Can you refresh my memory on that?
Sure. Yeah. So we got a lot of feedback, just concerns about construction and construction impacts on businesses. So ultimately with our stakeholder group, we put together this implementation recommendations memo, and we talk about best times to do construction, off peak, seasons, how to phase it over time, just and minimize construction impacts, other strategies too, like incorporating art into barriers, that sort of thing. But yeah, we landed on phased construction, just knowing one, the realities of funding, but primarily that came from addressing business concerns of it being the whole downtown under construction all at once, preferring phasing.
And just to kind of add to that, and maybe a little bit of a tie back to Councilor Yazzi's question, the phased construction is a direct response to community concern. And the phased design is just primarily a funding issue and prioritizing. We're trying to be respectful of the limited resources that we have and the, many different priorities. So I think our preference would be to complete design at one time, but in consideration of the funding, that's why the design phase is phased.
Excellent. That's it for now.
What sort of strategy do you plan on implementing to ensure businesses remain open and visible to the public purview of both tourists and local alike?
We had the stakeholder meeting that Ellie referred to. So there's a variety of creative ways that they can do that. We've been already having the conversations with BID to see how that is. Perhaps there's discounts, a punch card or a passport. You buy so many things or go to so many restaurants, you get a gift certificate afterwards. That already does this program over Christmas time downtown. So maybe it's that. As I mentioned, art, incorporating that in there. It'll be a lot of wayfinding signs, that type of thing. But there's been some creative solutions that other cities have used, and we're hoping to implement those as well. Make it fun and exciting and make sure those businesses are still being visited.
You anticipate the city working in conjunction with the BID to make that happen and not just putting it on other entities to kind of help facilitate?
Absolutely, yes. We've already been in conversation with them and already working with them throughout this process to figure out the best solutions, so they'll be a strong partner with them.
Only other last question I have, sorry. It's a stupid question, so I apologize. I've had a couple of concerns from businesses and individuals that are worried that there could be some sort of encumbrance upon them from a fiscal standpoint if we end up going through this process and the business is worried that they're going to be some sort of fiscally responsible for any sort of construction or I didn't know how to particularly answer that question. So I just want to make sure that we say it on public record that whatever is going to happen is, what do you anticipate? Do we think it's going to cost the businesses any money beyond just the time?
Beyond just the use of, whatever public funding mechanism we use, whether it be the 2015 half-cent tax that's voted on by voters for pedestrian improvements, that's the only funding. Grants, we'll do our best to try to find some funding to help alleviate the high expense. But yeah, we won't be asking for contributions from businesses, no.
Awesome, thank you.
Council Bosmans, do you have any questions?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I just maybe a short follow-up on what Dave was saying, and thank you for the presentation and the update. Are we going to compensate businesses for loss of business?
Are you talking about during construction?
Yeah, if there is a significant impact to their business and having people's ability to visit their activities, is there any thought about this?
I mean, I don't have a direct answer on that right now. I mean, yeah, I guess long story short, I don't have an answer. I do know that some cities have done sort of like grant applications or, other things that they've reached out for in the past. But at this point, I do not have a good answer unless somebody else on this table does.
I can say that when utilities replaces a water line and has to turn off water to a business for the time that it's repaired, we do not compensate a business for that time.
But again, I think, as far as maintaining access, to businesses throughout the construction period, and then also as Savannah hit on, trying to find ways to drive more business to businesses that are affected by any sort of construction. I think BID has shown an amazing job at doing this with their different gift card programs or discount programs. So I think those will be the two main mechanisms, is making sure that that access is maintained, making sure that it's understood publicly, that these businesses are open for business. Trying not to say the word business, but I don't have a good word to use. But yeah.
I'd like to hear some follow-up on that, because if there's a business that loses half of its revenue compared to last year, the same period, let's say it takes 6 months for a certain block to be done, then I assume that business is going to say that activity that the city initiated has impacted their revenues and profits and maybe employees. That was one thing. Hopefully we'll follow up on that. I had two smaller questions. How many restaurants currently have bump outs, and how many currently have patio seating areas? And if you don't remember, patio seating is when it's attached to the facade for the new councillors.
So those are two. One is the bump out program, which is when you see the patios on the streets themselves. We had around 20, I don't know the exact number for this year. And then we do have the bistro seating is when it's the seating, the patios on the sidewalk themselves. So that's the difference between those two things. And again, I'm sorry, I don't have that exact number for bistro.
I feel like it was like less than half of the bump outs for even applications from last year to this year because of the fee structure changing. And then also just there was other issues at play, like labor shortages that kind of helped make the decision for some of the restaurants. But I know it was less than half of last year for bump outs specifically.
Yeah, I remember it was not that of a high number, but 20 is pretty decent. Another question I have is, if I remember well, the initial concepts, I think there were 5 or 4, did not meet the turn radiuses for delivery trucks and fire trucks when they came from the side streets. And the initial, one of these initial concepts is, I think, the current preferred concept as it's written in the agenda package. Now, has this preferred concept been updated, or when we see an updated concept to make sure what we're looking at is actually going to meet those turn radiuses and any other requirements, even if it's at a higher level like the initial concept without having it worked out in detail? Is there a certain time frame for that?
Yeah, so that's our next step that we're getting into, the engineering design. So turn radii isn't something we look at that conceptual initial visionary design phase. Once we get into the actual engineering design is when we run the software that will definitely make sure all the turning radii are what they need to be based on truck routes and whatnot.
And do you foresee significant changes? Because I believe the bump outs on the bump outs on the corners were the key problem areas there.
I don't see for significant changes. I don't think it had been tested yet, so I don't know if there was issues or not, but our engineers will definitely take a close look. I do know that there's some instances where there's light posts and whatnot right on the corners now, and so we might need to reconfigure some of those. But even if the radii gets a little bit bigger, it wouldn't be a significant change to the design itself.
Okay, yeah. And the other questions that were asked, I have similar concerns about how the execution takes place, how the financing will take place, and the parking during construction and after. I think you answered quite a few of those questions already, but it will be interesting to see how that takes place. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Bosens. I have a couple questions. First of all, thank you for the presentation and continued efforts to staff on this project. Certainly the idea of expanded sidewalks, better accessibility, walkability, attractiveness, new infrastructure. I mean, that's not sexy, but it's absolutely needed, we know. So as much as these are difficult times for communities to go through, everybody does at some point. At some point, you have to replace your infrastructure and you have to improve your roadways. So I appreciate you moving forward on this project. I too wish we didn't have to do design. Basically, it sounds like through the end of 2025, correct? And so construction wouldn't therefore then happen until likely best case scenario, 2026. Is this the right kind of timeline?
I mean, there is a chance that we could go ahead and move forward with construction of the first 2 blocks that are designed, without having the full design done. That is a possibility, but otherwise, yes, it would have to be afterwards.
Okay. Interesting. Okay, so there could be some of that. And then I heard you mention then, Sarah, that you were talking about potentially using the 2015 tax for this,
Yes, we're currently using the 2015 for the design phase.
but for construction, which will be
And-
significantly more, obviously.
Right, and we would, our local match would be coming from the 2015 half cent, but like I said, Devin and I are pursuing any and every grant opportunity that we can that would be a good
Excellent.
match for this.
Okay. Just a couple of specific questions too. In this design process, do we know how is in relation to parking? I don't remember, I know we've talked a lot about parking, but how much parking will we be reduced by in this plan that we've selected?
That's not fully determined yet.
Okay.
So I mean, yeah, originally estimated, and Ellie, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it was
It wasn't any more than what the bump outs were. In the
Correct,
conceptual
yeah.
design,
Thank
it came out even to when we had the bump outs.
Yeah, I'd have to double check the numbers, but it was somewhere between 40 or 50 spaces being repurposed to other uses or being removed from
Okay,
Main
on the total corridor.
on all, between all 9 blocks. Yeah,
Okay.
which is about what it was from the bump out program at the time.
Okay. It sounds like Gilda has another question.
Just a clarification. Okay, are the bump outs the things on the corner or the bump outs what
No.
the restaurants are doing?
What the restaurants are
are
doing.
currently doing it.
Sorry, don't mean to
Okay.
be-
Yes, using a bump out is the patio on the street, the bulb out is this
Okay,
sidewalk
okay.
extension at the intersection. That is a little confusing.
So this project would result in 40 to 50 parking spaces being reduced, but we have also reduced it by 40 to 50 with the bump outs, and those bump outs would stay in this program? No, they would go away. So it's a net even. Okay. That's right, because we're allowing the patio seating. Okay, so that's good to know. Okay, thank you. And then another question I have was when we talk about the engineering study, and I think Councillor Bosman's touched on this, but I'm not sure if it was the same question. I didn't quite understand, but we had talked about possibly doing putting out markers literally in the streets so we could see and feel during the phase of design how that turning radius worked and drive down the street with a fire truck. And, you know, I mean, obviously I wouldn't drive it, but somebody would drive it and see how it, you know, how large vehicles down that with those bulb outs, I think you call them, how that might look. Do we still intend to do that? Because I think that would be effective.
That is still an opportunity. We've been looking at that. So the Pedlet that is currently down there is like kind of one step, you know, to demonstrate and, you know, kind of show what this could look like. But we have been talking about ways that we could put in temporary curb extensions at the intersections to demonstrate to, you know, to the community what this will look like, and then, you know, have people experience it. But I guess long story short, yes, we're looking at it, and
Good.
yeah, we'll
It
continue.
might be
Kind of
helpful.
just to add to Devin's there, if you haven't had an opportunity or put it together on the block between 800 and 8th and 7th, that Pedlet in front of Fired Up and
7th to
Switchback,
8th.
7th and 8th.
Yeah, okay.
That mirrors, it's really similar to what the expanded sidewalk will look like. So
Oh,
we
that's
we
fabulous.
installed it as an intent to kind of show the community what this impact would be.
That's great to know, because that is a really nice area. I think Councilor Bosman and I noticed that once on a walk downtown. That's a great area. Okay. I think that the one thing I just want to note is when I look at your outreach efforts and the community input that we've received, I think it's impressive. And I'm really thankful that we've done so much community outreach, and we will, I'm sure, continue that through this process. Do you have separate meetings for it? Separate?
We don't have any scheduled at this time. You know, we were kind of waiting on how the project was going to move forward at this initial stage, but we will be having a meeting coming up this fall, and it will be specifically to kind of talk about trees and those locations and how this, you know, the streetscape will look moving down the corridor. So yeah, we're hoping it will be a very interactive
Excellent.
meeting for folks to attend.
I sure appreciate that. We're going to close up really soon, but if you have a quick question.
I have one quick question. Okay, could you also put in your estimate how much we're going to charge the businesses on the bottom floor for that extra space they're potentially getting? Because, I don't think that we're going to give it to them for free.
No, we wouldn't. It would be the same, similar program to what we have currently with our bistro program. Businesses reapply every year and then they have to pay that annual fee. I think the fee structure will be different once we have this.
Yeah,
But it would be something similar. that
it'll
we-
have to be something based upon market value here because, I'd hate to give subsidies to the bottom floor businesses and disregard the people on the second floor because it all has to be equitable.
Yes, and that must be something that we will look at in more detail as we move this program forward.
I have one little comment still, if I may, Mayor.
Okay,
Now,
go ahead.
Well, one little comment to add to Councillor Yazzie is that the businesses on the corner likely also don't have the opportunity to have access to that outdoor space because of, I think there is fire protection or there are some requirements and maybe staff can explain a little bit on that. But my other question was, if I remember well, there was about 75 businesses that were not very supportive of the downtown next steps. And I was wondering if because I believe staff says that most of it was addressed. I was wondering if there's a benefit in getting more feedback from this group or if we even should proactively solicit feedback from that group.
We will continue to solicit feedback from, everybody, including the folks that were on that original list. I know that several of the people on that list have been very active and involved throughout the process. So we do have, their contact information, and we'll continue keeping businesses and other stakeholders that have had, input in the past as a significant part of this process as we move forward.
And is that something that somehow will come to us as well? So we see that they are less non-supportive or turn around in being supportive?
Yeah, I do believe we've kind of started a process where we really provide council with updates on our outreach and engagement efforts. So we will continue that process and make sure that council is aware that, we are continuing to work with the community.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And thank you so much for your time.
Mayor, may I just ask
Oh,
one, it's a
sorry.
yes or
Okay.
no question. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, go
It's-
ahead.
it's literally-
Just trying to wrap it
Are
up.
there any current restrictions on length of vehicles that go down Main Avenue in Durango? Are there any in our code or any in our ordinances?
I don't think so.
So we
And
don't have
parking
one
lot-
nor enforce anything.
Not length, no.
Okay.
The only thing I would say is that there is a citation for not fitting wholly in space. So you can be ticketed if you're hanging off the edge of the.
Parking space.
I'm thinking of commercial applications. So, okay, thank you.
This is great. Okay, one more question.
Okay, just one point of clarification. Okay, so when you had the chart up on your PowerPoint where you had the original design and then the other design, I can't recall that. But the middle design is what you're aiming to proceed with. Now I'm wondering if you could go ahead and just delete those other two so people understand that traffic is still going to flow down Main Street. And I think that's a major concern with people.
And yeah, and I guess to that point, we also had a traffic study done, and what that, right now it's at the preliminary, so we'll have it posted for everybody to see soon. But what it talks about is the fact that we are keeping the lane configuration as it is now. And so delivery trucks will still be able to park in the middle center turn lane. It will still have the left turn function and the straightaway as we do now. But yes, that's a good point. Thank you.
Great. Okay, we're going to move on. Thank you so much for your presentation. It's a great opportunity to get Special Counsel Yazzie and Woodruff up to date on this one. That's good. All right, now we'll move on to the FAB board, right, Jose?
Thinking so, unless there's another change I missed, but I'm
Okay.
pretty sure now it is the FAB Advisory Board recommendations.
Great.
And we'll have Devin Schmidt, our CFO, do that presentation.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Council, Devin Schmidt, CFO, and Staff Liaison for the Financial Advisory Board. Here today to share some recommendations from the Financial Advisory Board as it relates to the 2024 capital projects. In the 2005 Parks Open Space and Trails, the 2015 Parks Multimodal, 2019 Streets, as well as Sewer and Water Construction Funds. So kind of in this meaty packet that was also included online is the memo from the chair that discusses the meeting and discussion that was had by the board. So a lot of items were discussed at that August 10th meeting. So if you look at that second page in the memo, that really kind of covers the 2024 budget discussion. So I'll just take you through some of the high level points of what's in the memo, what's in the recommendations, and then see if there's any questions from council. So we'll start with some high level discussion from the 2005 post fund. So a lot of the discussion was around the Schneider Park improvements, including the plan for restroom upgrades as well as Greenmont Cemetery. And the request from the board was to have the budget request updated after designs are completed. This motion passed unanimously by the board. For the 2015 fund, this included considering the scope of work to be completed for Durango Mesa Park in 2024. Board members also considered the College and 8th Avenue Safety Grant expense. So how those projects are grant funded, and the scope of work being completed on Rusa Avenue Connect design and construction, and the scope for the budget allocations for the Midtown Safety and Connectivity Project, as well as Downtown Next Steps design, which you just heard about. Several members did mention that more public input was requested, and staff commented that input had happened, as again, you just heard about. And so the board also noted that the current budget is for design work, and that the intention of more public input once the design work is completed. And that motion passed unanimously for the 2015 fund. For the 2019 Streets Tax Fund, this included review around County Road 250, 251, and that 2023 reappropriation into 2024, with that project coming in over budget. That motion also passed. And for the sewer construction fund, some of the high level information or questions that the board had asked was on why the Santa Rita Road was included in the sewer fund. Staff shared that that is due to the inclusion of the original Santa Rita Water Reclamation Facility construction plan, and that motion passed. And then finally, the Water Construction Fund. There was a consideration for the line item with the Next Steps construction that was discussed, and of course, that is contingent on where that project moves in 2024. So after you kind of get through those first 2 pages, the budget team had developed a new way or an innovative solution to review recommendation that provides the board with an overview and background information for the request. So it shares the ballot language and the purpose of the project. In addition, it does include the financial analysis of the fund. So how is the fund sitting completely? And then impact analysis with strategic plan goal alignment, strengths, weaknesses, and mitigating factors. So I'm really proud of my budget team for coming up with this proposal, especially, the board getting off their feet midway through the year and being able to present this recommendation to council was certainly a great feat by the board and staff. So with that, any questions from council that I can answer?
Can you attach like reading glasses when you get them?
We need magnifying glasses.
I literally went like, I was like, oh.
Fair enough.
Questions from council? It's a lot of information to sift through.
I can ask a little question or make a little comment maybe, but
Okay, go ahead.
I'm not sure if you had a chance to listen to the meeting on what was it? August 30th from the FAB, but they really raised a variety of concerns and they were pretty well articulated. And my high level observation is that the FAB primarily reviews and recommends on the source of the funds to be used. There's a 2005 or 2019 sales tax for capital projects that staff lists, prioritizes and brings forwards to the FAB. And they do discuss some of the projects in detail, but they're not reviewing or prioritizing the projects for the benefit to the community or costs of maintenance or operational stuff, nor are they the public venue for that. And I just wanted to, see how we as a council manage that part of it, because it used to be the boards and commissions, and maybe and there will be future working groups to be able to discuss specific topics.
Thank you, Councilor Bosmans. I did listen to the meeting and on August 30th. I recognize that we're going to be talking about that on September 19th, I believe. And so I would reserve that conversation for that time. This is specifically about the prioritized projects for this for the capital projects budget. So I thought that we were going to stick with the discussion around the projects that the FAB board did approve, governance document and how they evaluate and or things like that, I think will be the next discussion.
And I would note too, these are the projects that were at the past 2 study sessions in August that council has seen. And so the financial advisory board and staff came to consensus. So there wasn't any differences in what staff had proposed versus what the financial advisory board shared in the recommendations and those proposals. So
Just skimming through this, I just want to say thank you. I think that having the project review where you're saying who recommends it, who opposes it, and is super helpful, like the summary, as well as the financial analysis of every project like that. I think that's phenomenal. So thank you so much for organizing it that way and makes me have no questions. So.
Questions? It seems like people have kind of already been through it and last meeting as well. So I don't have any questions either. I read through the document. I agree with Mayor Pro Tem Buell that this is just, I really appreciate the layout, the way you did it, the way you've given information for each of the taxes. It's helpful and no questions. Okay, Gilda has a question. Good.
I have one question, but it's not about this. I think this is excellent work, but I'm wondering with the FAB board, since we consolidated, and you don't have to answer if you don't want to, but since we consolidated all the committees and put everything together on the FAB board to deal with the allocation of the sales tax, and they started just being thrown together and they've worked through the problem. Do you think that that solution has worked out from the elimination of the board and putting all those people onto the FAB board is suitable for allocating the sales taxes? It's kind of
You
a
can answer
theory.
if you want, but I think we're getting a little bit off topic of agenda, but if you'd like to try to answer quick.
You want me to answer that for you?
Yeah.
I think so. What I'd say is we're having some pretty healthy discussions. We're in the first few months of trying to get this to work. It was a very steep learning curve. We're continuing to work. I do have some meetings that I'm going to reach out to with the chair and the vice chair, as well as the FAB board on a schedule of work. And I think it's going to go smoother. But again, I don't want to speak for the board or on that portion, but I do have some opportunities I think that were presented for us to continue to help and improve the process, in which we can do with any process is that we should always be looking for continual improvement.
And I'll add with the email that Aaron sent out with the upcoming focus groups and the structure and that getting implemented. I'm excited to see how the cohesiveness of those comes together and how it enhances what we do for public engagement. So like I'm a fan of like TBD. Let's see how it all unfolds.
But as far back to the projects, I mean, this is an impressive list of projects that we have. on our list for 2024. Extremely impressive. I, yeah, hope that staff's going to be busy for sure in all the departments. But I'm excited about some of the projects that have been prioritized and including some of the maintenance projects that are really important. And so I think that it looks like we're really making great progress, just in general, very high level on some, assets and maintaining our assets that are going to be really beneficial for the community over time. It seems like you guys have done a great job prioritizing, presenting it to both council and the FAB board. And everybody seems in agreement. So I think we're good, which is impressive. Thank you so much. That's the fastest 45 minutes we've had so far.
For sure. And Mayor and Council, I didn't know if maybe you want to take a quick 5-minute break before we switch into the housing. It's more than available for us since we have some time. I'll leave
Sure.
that up to y'all.
Okay, 5-minute break. That sounds great. Let's do it. Thanks.
Yeah, he was so nice. And he was literally like, oh, where are you from? I'm like, I'm Durango. And he's like, Scott, amazing. And I was like, oh my God, me too. We fangirled over you.
All right, we're going to call the meeting back to order. Thank you, guys. And we are starting now back, moving on to accessory dwelling unit program background and upcoming changes. If you guys want to introduce yourselves.
Yeah, good afternoon. Thank you, Mayor and Council. Scott Shine with the Community Development Department.
Lily Oswald with the Community Development Department.
And Dan Armentano.
Thank you for joining us. Take it over.
We are here at the request of Councilor Yazzie, and then all of council asked for a little bit of background and update on the accessory dwelling unit program. Something we're very proud of. Back when I first came here in 2013, 2014, we were developing this program to legitimize existing dwelling units that have sort of been developed over time in a gray area of legality. So we were able to legalize a lot of units that existed and give property owners that assurance that they then had a legal unit and eliminate the uncertainty there. And then we provided a path for new ADUs, and Dan and Lily are going to provide a lot more information about the program. But that was an award-winning program. We got some recognition from both the state American Planning Association, and we presented at a national conference. I remember the room being packed, and it was at that time, it was just an emerging issue, and we really took the lead on developing an innovative program and finding a way forward. So we're really happy with this program, and alongside our vacation rental program, have really shown ourselves to be leaders with these kind of new issues that have been emerging. So excited to give you an update and talk about next steps. I'm just going to introduce Lily a little bit more. She's a new addition to our team, started at the beginning of June, grew up in Durango, graduated from Animas High, and we were really happy to be able to bring her back home. I think she's excited to be here. And her position, she's the planner, but she has a specific role in code reform and making sure that our adopted standards are aligned with strategic plan objectives that the council sets, as well as the comprehensive plan, as well as community engagement efforts, making sure that that's all getting integrated into the adopted standards that we govern development and land use with. So it's a pretty unique position. We're excited to have somebody in-house focused on those things instead of always having to pay a consultant to do that. We like to have those in-house resources to make sure we're agile and adapting quickly to community needs. So really excited to have Lily on board, and I'll turn it over to her and Dan for the rest of the presentation.
Yeah, quite the introduction, but thank you for having me. Like Scott mentioned, the intent today for the study session is really just some informational background and recent changes to the city's ADU code. Let's see. Okay, there it's going now. Okay, perfect. So the study session item aligns with the following strategic plan objectives, including affordability and economic opportunity, as well as enhanced livability and sense of place, and the financial excellence and high-performing governance objectives. And I'll hand it over to Dan for some background that he'll speak to on the ADU program.
Thank you. This device is new to me, so I'll do the best I can with that. Just to kind of start with some history, back in 2013, the city initiated a process to update our broader land use and development code. And as part of that, we had the intent to legalize ADUs, accessory dwelling units, within the city, understanding there were a lot of existing units already out there. and wanting to as well create a process to allow for new units as well. So there was a really robust public engagement process, a massive response from the community. The Community Development Department was actually picketed by folks that opposed this. But we really did have a strong dialogue with members of the community about what those standards should look like and what they should include. We worked with them for a number of months before finally coming to an agreement. And I think a lot of the standards that we have in our code that are somewhat unique, like the owner occupancy requirements, minimum lot size requirements, really came out of that public process. That code was adopted in 2014, in the summer of 2014, and those provisions went into effect at that time. That was specifically for EN Established Neighborhood 1 and 2. We expanded the program to EN3 shortly thereafter in 2015. And there's been some other changes since then, which I'll talk about on the next slide. Last year, we went through and created a survey for the community to really try to gauge public perception about ADUs, kind of take a status check of the program, see where it was at. Also wanted to understand the public's knowledge of the program and their knowledge of our regulations, and then also get feedback on what they thought about a potential incentive program to help create new ADUs. And our ADUs for Locals rebate program came out of that. Saw some pretty strong support for our ADU program broadly from that survey. We had over 300 responses from the community. So it's a pretty positive outcome. Based on a lot of those responses, we drafted some amendments, which came before City Council about a year ago and were adopted. And I'll go over sort of the nuts and bolts of what those entailed at that time. There we go. Sorry, I'm following along on my own computer here too. So as far as program changes since 2014, as I mentioned in 2015, we expanded the program to EN3. That was a pretty simple change. In 2019, much broader expansion to the program to Established Neighborhoods 4, 5, and 6. That's kind of the Crestview area, the Riverview neighborhood, and as well as Hillcrest. In those areas, we allowed integrated ADUs only. And then in 2022, last year, the more significant changes that we brought forward were to remove minimum lot size requirements across the board in all zones for integrated ADUs. So that's attached ADUs to the main home. We also eliminated a provision that prevented variances for properties with ADUs. So we basically allow alternative compliance for properties, specifically for ADU design standards. We expanded some options for parking, created more flexibility to use on-street parking across the board. That was a provision that existed in Established Neighborhoods 4, 5, and 6 only. And then, as I mentioned, we adopted and launched that ADUs for Locals rebate program, which essentially offsets the impact fees charged for ADUs in exchange for allowing a local worker to live in that unit. So to go into some numbers, the graph on the top is the number of applications and I think it's really permits, approved permits from 2014 when the program began through today. And then the table at the bottom is the number of actual COs, certificates of occupancy, that we've issued for ADUs, so the number of developed ADUs. Starting with the graph, you'll notice that it's pretty consistently, we've had 5 to 10 or so ADU applications come in each year. I think this year we are on track to kind of be a bit of a spike again based on the response that we've seen to the ADUs for Locals program and the interest in the program based on those code amendments that went through. We have 6, I believe, approved applications that have come through, and there are a number more. I think there's at least 2 or 3 more that are in the works right now. So I think that's the outcome that we were hoping for with that ADUs for Locals program. As far as the number of developed ADUs, number of certificates of occupancy, 44 COs issued out of 67 approved permits. I think that's a reflection of it's easy, relatively easy to get through the land use approval process. And then when push comes to shove and folks actually have to spend the money to build the units themselves, that's where they can potentially run into some issues financially. That's a bit of a hypothesis, but I think the numbers are a pretty good indication of that. So again, potentially something that with our ADUs for Locals program, if we can offset some costs of ADU development, hopefully we can see a higher ratio of approved ADUs actually being built. And this is just a map showing where ADUs are. This map includes both pre-existing ADUs, which I haven't spoken about yet, and new permitted ADUs. The pre-existing ADUs were the units that existed out in the community before we legalized them in the code. When we did legalize them, we had a whole bunch of properties come forward and say, hey, we have a second unit here. We'd like to legalize it. So those are all basically pre-2014 units. And then the blue stars on there are the new ADUs that have been built. And you'll notice just on the, I guess, both visually and on the data on the left, the vast majority have been in established neighborhoods 1, 2, and 3. And then a lot fewer in ENs 4, 5, and then the other areas. I think it's a little bit easier to build in ENs 1, 2, and 3 because there's alley access. Detached units are a little bit more popular. So I think that's probably the discrepancy for that. Reason for that discrepancy, sorry. So I'll pass it back to Lily.
Thank you. And a full-size version of this map is in your council packet too for reference. It's a little bit hard to see on our slide. So some current ADU provisions, which we wanted to highlight in Durango, which again is, it sets the tone for a lot of different ADU programs around the state, which have used Durango's ADU code as a model. Some of these include, again, no minimum lot size for integrated ADUs, the maintained design standards, so those context-sensitive design standards to maintain the characteristics of the different zoning districts which have been established and historic neighborhoods around Durango. And then also, of course, the owner occupancy requirement is unique to Durango. And all of the changes which have been made to the ADU program since 2014 have been community-based and largely incremental, just based on feedback, changing statutes and different design standards throughout those different neighborhoods. And the goal being to encourage homeownership and affordable housing options and opportunities throughout Durango for that missing middle housing piece. The results of the current ADU provisions is that everyone in Durango has the option to have an ADU. That's except for in subdivisions with those pre-existing restrictions and standards. And the city rarely receives complaints related to ADUs. And we found that the community largely appreciates and accepts ADUs as a housing option, which of course aligns with different neighborhood contexts and those standards. And as was mentioned, the 2023 ADU for Locals rebate program was put in place with $80,000 total to be divided among 10 completed ADUs, which would have to meet a certain criteria. That would be $8,000 per ADU, again, to offset those costs, including permitting costs for newly developed ADUs meeting those standards. Some recent ADU numbers are that there have been 11 limited use permits issued for ADUs between 2022 and 2023. There have been 5 ADUs completed through 2022 and 2023. Like Dan mentioned, hopefully some more in the works as well as 1 rebate issued so far in 2023 with maybe 1 or more queued up in the near future. And that staff finds that current ADUs are in a variety of stages in the development pipeline, so these numbers will shift, but we are hoping that the increased interest in ADUs following that rebate program, which has exceeded staff's expectations, will be illustrated through increased ADUs and ownership opportunities within Durango. The next steps for this program, of course, the intention today was really just to provide some information on the program's background and our ADU provisions, but we will continue to track and align with best practices and changing statutes. So the department will continue to keep our finger on the pulse with updated policies and provisions to make sure that we are aligned and have an effective ADU program while maintaining a unique and independent program for the community. Some possible changes to the code, again, to align with community and its goals, would be to clarify the public improvement requirements, to review minimum lot size requirements for ADU construction, the rebate program for Locals, as well as parking standards throughout different zones. And that's all we had for you today, if there are any questions.
Great, let's go ahead. Who wants to start?
Go ahead.
I've got a few.
Good, go ahead.
So when you talk about the alternative compliance mechanism, which is a variance process, what is allowed to be asked for through a variance? I mean, I'm sure there's certain stipulations like parking or square footage, or what is allowable and not allowable in that variance process?
Yeah, good question. So parking is a good example of something that is not allowed to be, basically modified through that alternative compliance process. Same thing with the overall square footage of an ADU that's set at 550. That cannot be modified. The owner occupancy requirement is another one that cannot be modified. Really what it applies to is the design standards, right? So the setbacks, how far it can be from a property line, the height requirements. There's a number of additional pretty targeted design requirements for ADUs that don't exist necessarily for single family homes. Those are areas where we can offer some flexibility through that alternative compliance process.
Is there any specific reason why there is no variance process for some of those other things? Have you received pushback from the public or from previous councils?
Yeah, I think, going back to 2014, when we had that really robust public input and process on this topic, owner occupancy was one of the key issues. I think ensuring that the units were truly accessory to the main home in terms of their size was another key consideration. So that's why we've capped it at 550 square feet. There's definitely been conversations about things like minimum lot size, but I think really design is where alternative compliance is the best fit anyways. That's typically how that process is used for single family homes. It's really for design standards and not necessarily for those additional requirements, which are really more use focused than design focused. So those requirements that aren't eligible really make sure that the unit is truly an accessory use to the single family home as opposed to, more of a second unit on its own with less requirements. So.
And I had one thing on the owner occupancy requirement. There is like a hardship provision where we can grant a waiver. Like if someone loses their job and they need to move, they can ask for like a 2-year exemption from the owner occupancy. That's been in there since the beginning, because council was concerned about if life circumstances changed, how can people still meet that? So we built that into it. It's not exactly a variance, but it's a way to accommodate a unique situation. So
it's anecdotal, but I was talking to a community member and he was working on an ADU at his house for one of his employees. And some of the roadblocks for him were the square footage, the parking, and there's no way to bypass that. So he just gave up. So I don't know if that's something that we could look at from a council perspective to see if there's more opportunity for folks. I mean, if it's 575, is that really that big of a deal? I don't know. But you're the expert. So I want to make sure that there's some unintended consequences that I'm not thinking of that you know more about than I do. But for me, it's just like, let's give people the opportunity to create more infill when possible.
Yeah, I agree. And I think personally, if we were going to be flexible on the square footage of an ADU, I would say, let's just increase the number, not allow alternative compliance, but just say maybe it's appropriate to allow a larger unit. I'm not saying that that's what I think we should do necessarily, but we could look at it. Just because, if you start to give a little bit, and you're doing it through a variance process, then that's typically more of an indication that the code should change as opposed to just allowing variances for a slightly larger unit. Typically not something that's based on a hardship. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Okay, just a thought on your point, Dan, about maybe the ordinance has to change. Okay, so on the lot size, maybe we could work with that to make it a little bit smaller. So, somebody who's building a unit for their employees can proceed with that. And maybe we should look at working on the parking issue, because parking in Durango is an issue. And, maybe we should just let it fly. If you get there first, you get a bark, except for people who have their driveways, So maybe those are two things we can look at, is making the lot size, changing that to allow for more units, and also maybe giving them a break on the parking regulations. Now, the reason I wanted to review the ADU issue is because I do think these would provide more accessible and affordable housing for our residents, because we are in a housing crunch. So maybe long-term, you could look at those two things, maybe eliminating the lot size and looking at the parking standards. But, affordability for people is my issue, and people having somewhere to live.
There was some opposition back in the day about removing lot size. Can you talk to that a little bit as to what it in regards to?
So I can't really speak to the original 2013 timeline because I wasn't here for that. But I think in the survey responses that we got, we did hear a number of people say keep minimum lot sizes in place. Where we landed was to waive it for integrated ADUs as opposed to for detached units. I think that was kind of a good compromise on our end. Again, as Lily mentioned, incremental changes to the codes that seemed appropriate. We didn't want to just repeal that entirely based on, again, the amount of the public input that we got at the time back in 2014, as well as, based on some of the responses that we got in the survey.
Do you remember? I feel like I recall it was a lot. And that allows for not impeding any more yard space or privacy for neighbors, kind of ish, because you're not taking away from that by putting a detached unit. Is that, I feel like when I remember hearing about this back in 20, whatever it was, that was the big pushback, is that the lot sizes in these areas there's no alleys for access. It would impede on green space and privacy for neighbors. That was the pushback that I remember. I just am trying to recall.
Yeah, that's good recollection. The areas where there are minimum lot size and detached ADUs are not allowed are where, yards back right up to each other. There's no alley access. So utility service to those areas is difficult. And privacy in backyards was a big concern. We also asked a lot about owner occupancy, and we thought we were going to move towards maybe scaling back the owner occupancy requirement, but the community came out very strongly and said that's a key component of the program. So we kind of, like Dan said, we compromised a little bit and allowed the integrated ADUs on any lot, basically in the city, any residential area. So
I like that compromise. And I am a fan, though, of looking at, what is the proper square footage? Is it, 550? Is it 575? Is it 600? And making that change if we think it's good. Maybe look at other cities and what they have, and then potentially lot size, look at that, what is the proper size. The spirit and character of Durango is super important, but also housing and getting as much info as possible is obviously super important too. So trying to marry that as best as we can, which I feel like you're coming to the table with compromise, and us, making sure we're trying to find that middle. So thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Bosmans, I think your hand's raised.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Let me click that out. I appreciate the presentation. It's very beneficial, I think, to have an understanding of what the ADUs brings to our community. It shows that I think only 4.4 ADUs units have been added on average for the last 10 years, which is quite low, and it won't make much of a dent in the housing supply. But of course, every little bit helps. So in that sense, it's good. And I think I understand there is support from our community for ADUs. Now, in my opinion, I'm more concerned about the impact that ADUs have on existing neighborhoods. And if the community and council thinks that's a good approach, is there ever been thought about, for example, allowing multi-family homes? So where you don't have the requirement for the homeowner to be in the house, one of the requirements for ADUs, as you mentioned earlier, and to just go almost free for all at ADUs or multifamily homes on every property lot within the regulations. And I'm not saying I'm supportive of that either, but is that something that has been considered to add more housing units?
Yeah, that's a good question. We've actually talked about that quite a bit. We understand, we know full well that there are a number of properties out there in the city limits that are multifamily homes. Oftentimes they're single family homes that are cut up into 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, however many units. So we probably in 2019 and 2020, some planning staff, including myself, did sit down and talk about what it would look like to try to create a process to both legalize those units and potentially allow for more of them. We ran into a few roadblocks. The comprehensive plans density, future land use densities was a big one for us. And, we got probably at least half the way through drafting that code before essentially putting it on hold. So we do right now have allowances for duplexes in our established neighborhood 1 and 2 zones. That's 2 units on a property without any of those ADU specific requirements in terms of the maximum unit size, no owner occupancy requirement. Those duplex lots must be a minimum of 7,500 square feet. So that's kind of the only true multifamily use that we allow in our established neighborhood zones, at least at this point.
Well, thank you for that.
The fire code also got very tricky on legalizing existing multiplexes, as we referred to them, but it's a trend that's happening all over the country as far as allowing more infill in single family zoned areas. So it's something we're tracking, and we feel like the ADU program has been a good start, and we'll continue to monitor that.
Yeah, I was wondering on the, as Councillor Woodruff was mentioning, on the requirements, and to what degree is the requirement for a duplex different from the requirement of an ADU? Because in a way, it's the same thing, except for one has an owner living there.
A lot of the design requirements are pretty comparable, depending on whether it's a detached unit or an attached unit is in part of the main principal structure. If it is a detached unit along the alley, then a lot of the same design requirements in terms of maximum height, setbacks, those types of things are pretty consistent with ADUs. We've actually gone through and made some changes to the code to really try to align those as much as we can. The main difference with the duplex and an ADU, between a duplex and an ADU, is no owner occupancy requirement, and there is no no unit size maximum for a duplex unit. There's some other additional minor things, like you can have a short-term rental in a duplex unit, you can't with an ADU. Yeah, so those are the main changes.
Yeah, as another question on the same topic, is there a possibility to add in your drawings of the city where the ADUs are shown also the locations of duplexes and compare that, to have that in one drawing and see how many we already have in certain, because they're grandfathered in, I guess, or legalized after the fact?
Yeah, I think we could pull our data and probably map that out for council if they were interested in seeing that.
Maybe my last comment or question is how do we ensure that residents that may have lived a long time in a residential area and do not get any negative impacts with noise parking? You already mentioned some of it, but I can imagine that there's a long-time residents or someone who just purchased a specific home at top dollar in a specific quiet neighborhood, and then being faced with if that would happen, because it's only 4.4 ADUs a year on average, but let's say that house gets neighbors that are both ADU added. And if it's a student, he puts in 10 students, and then you have a very busy parking issue, noisy issue. And obviously that complaint would only be one person and not a representative survey from our community. But how do we address that? I mean, how do we prevent situations from that, like that happening? Because these code changes are irreversible. Yeah, you cannot say at a certain point your ADU is no longer allowed.
The two primary ways that we've set up to avoid that are the size of the unit and the owner occupancy requirement. So it's not just a rental that a off-site landlord owns. That owner is there, they're monitoring what's going on in the unit, generally going to manage it better than just an off-site landlord. And if it's a 550 square foot unit, you're really not going to have 10 people in there. It's going to be a couple, maybe a couple and a small child, but that gets really tight. But usually it's a single person or a couple. So those are the two ways we really felt like we could allow the additional unit without the potential negative impacts.
There's also noticing requirements with limited use permits for ADUs that welcome community feedback, neighborhood feedback based on when those are posted and the postcards are sent out.
Yeah, and maybe my last one is for the service that, or the feedback that has got that you have received in support of ADUs. Would it be beneficial to do a survey of the specific residences in these zones that are being considered to be added, to see if those specific residential areas have support or are supportive of change in the land use and development code?
So we've actually already legalized ADUs in all of our residential zones. I think when we did our survey, we did get a pretty decent sample from all of our established neighborhoods in terms of property owners within those areas. There was a question where they were able to tell us exactly where they lived. And I think we got really good representation from across the board. And yeah, those same results, I would say, were applicable to all geographic areas and zones within the city in terms of folks being pretty supportive and pretty accepting of these units in their neighborhoods and in the community broadly.
Okay, well, thank you for explaining all those things. Appreciate it.
Okay, I have one question. It might be long though. Okay, so in EN 4, 5, and 6, you allow integrated units. That's correct. Okay, so does that mean that, and then you said you can build a duplex anywhere. So can you build a duplex in EN 4, 5, and 6 then instead of a AUD?
No, duplexes are only EN 1 and 2, and then also in our EN multifamily zone, as well as our other higher density residential zones.
All righty, so why, I need to know the reason since I'm new to this. So why do you only allow integrated units in EN 4, 5, and 6?
That was based on the fact mostly that there's no alley access in the vast majority of those areas. So if you think about the typical ADU, single family home with an ADU lot layout, it's basically a front loaded home. So the home is facing the street and then there's an alley and the ADU is detached and along the alley. So it's behind the single family home. And that is not a lot configuration that exists in the 4, 5, and 6 zones. We did talk about maybe allowing detached ADUs on corner lots, which have 2 frontages. We haven't gone there yet. I think that's something that we could maybe reconsider. One of the other things that was really kind of crucial in determining that no, we shouldn't allow detached ADUs in those zones was emergency access. So fire departments, EMS services need to have a certain clearance to get by the house, to get to a unit in the back, and then to get a patient out of there. So those zones have setbacks at 5 to 7 feet, and that is not necessarily enough clearance for EMS to get somebody in and out of there in the event of an emergency. So that was another one of those factors that was part of the reason for that determination.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for the presentation. I just have a question just kind of from the past. In the past, we've talked in dealing with parking. The idea of permit parking has come up in some of the neighborhoods. Are we ever going to kind of
I think it was on the parking.
talk about that any further? I think we talked about it at one point in EN1. So I just,
Hi, Sarah Hill, Transportation Director. Yes, we just had, we reviewed potential residential parking permit programs in the comprehensive parking management plan. And there is a process outlined for implementing those in different neighborhoods. It's pretty extensive. Off the top of my head, I'm not able to step all the way through it, but I can get that to you. It just requires a lot of signatures, a lot of petitions, has to meet a number of different requirements, but we do have a process in place for that. There's just no precedent yet.
right, no precedent. And obviously there's issues with the parking program. I'm not necessarily saying do it. I'm just saying, in the event that we got to the point where we really wanted to encourage these ADUs and allow for the parking variances, if you had parking permit, then you're allowing your residents to have first priority say, which might help. At some point, we might get there. I know some communities that do it. So anyway, just threw that out there for consideration. And I really appreciate some of the changes that we're making and making it kind of more uniform throughout the community as far as our standards go for, in the different neighborhoods. Of course, there are some differences, but I think we're trying to make it more uniform throughout all the established neighborhoods. So that's good. And yeah, I have no other questions. Do you?
I have a random one. Does it, for an ADU, a detached ADU, does it need to be stick built or can somebody just put in a tiny home?
Good question. They can do a tiny home, but it needs to be on a permanent foundation and it needs to meet our design requirements. So.
And
Great.
connected to utilities.
Okay.
So there's not a whole lot of benefit. You can't just back in a trailer and use it as an ADU.
Cool. Thank you.
One other thing just to have on council's radar and with your involvement in CML and CAST, Senate Bill 213 last year had some pretty aggressive overrides from the state on local control of ADUs particularly, and other density and things like that. So we track that very closely. As you know, you were involved in getting feedback to the state. We imagine something revised will come back up. So we'll continue to monitor that and how that would affect the program. They specifically looked at parking. They looked at owner occupancy, lot size, I think was in there. So just as a heads up, we'll continue to monitor that and get you guys information as that starts to develop for the next session.
Great. Thanks so much. I think we are all set and can move with that. Yeah, and can move forward. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for the update. Now we're doing the upcoming community code development code amendments. So some people stay.
Buckle up. We're going to continue on land use and development code. Get ready.
I think this,
couple other staff.
Scott, I think the saying is you paid for the whole seat, but you're only going to need the edge.
That's what I was looking for. Thanks, Dave. I also like.
Feel free to use that.
Long-time listener, first-time caller. You can't use that one anymore. Thank you for having us. Some other community development team members have come up, so I'll let them introduce themselves.
Yeah, good afternoon, Daniel Murray.
Good afternoon, Eva Henson, Housing Innovation Manager.
Lily Oswald, still here.
So we'll try and get through these relatively efficiently and being conscious of your time. We do have kind of 4 sections of this presentation where there will be logical breaks to probably pause and say, okay, any questions about that piece? So I know you're trying to hold questions until the end, but I think we'll take some breaks and allow for questions specific to the items that we're going to advance. So we'll let you know when a good time for questions is. This is kind of a catch-all. We wanted to give you a heads up as we advance sort of a suite of code amendments related to these 4 topics: boards and commissions, parking provisions, process improvements, and some fee updates, and then the fair share program. So we're going to touch on each of these, and then we anticipate bringing you actual red lines to the code after going through the planning commission hearing process. Those come to council for final approval. So it's looking like sort of October through December, we'll be advancing a bunch of these for consideration. So these items specifically hit on these 3 strategic plan goals, similar to the ADU program, but particularly with our process improvements and some of those fee assessments, we're looking to make sure we're meeting the financial excellence and high performing government objectives as we're setting up our systems. This is a graphic we've used all year, and we showed earlier, I think in May last time when we came and gave you an update. This just shows sort of the 4 pillars of our work plan, departmental work plan for the year. And these 3 are specifically kind of what we're touching on today. Code reform, obviously making updates to our standards that reflect the community desires and council direction. Process improvement and service enhancements, and then taking more of a partnership approach with our customers to think about facilitating the right types of development that we want to see instead of just responding to development applications that come in. We're starting to take a more proactive approach in shaping those. I will give you a little bit of a teaser. We're excited. Next meeting on the 19th, I think a team is going to come and share community development's customer service strategy. And we recently did a survey of our customers about their experience with our department. And we have some results to share, as long as some desires for moving forward with some updates there. So that'll be at your next meeting. To begin, we'll cover the board and commission update. This was related to the work council did to assess the overall board and commission structure for the city. You started with the advisory board updates. You recently made some liquor local licensing authority changes. This is another component of that. But we did pull it out of that initial suite of changes because we wanted more time to engage with those commission members and research other options. So Lily will give an update on that work.
Thanks. And as a refresher, some of these goals were presented to you during a council study session in May. But again, the goals really of this update process are the focal point of this effort, and that's to remove redundancy, increasing efficiency, while really allowing for that adequate public input to be part of that. So not just cutting out that as part of the process, ensuring that it's an effective path for the staff, for the department, for the public, for neighbors, for everyone who's involved with the development processes, but just making sure that it's clear between these boards and commissions what the different criteria for decisions are and how that can be consolidated to lessen those administrative burden and costs, again, while ensuring there's public involvement. So the city charter, the land use and development code, state statutes all involve a variety of different roles and responsibilities and duties that have to be fulfilled by the Board of Adjustment or Appeals, the Planning Commission, and the Design Review Board. So the department's being very careful to ensure that all of those roles and responsibilities are being upheld within the newly considered quote unquote Planning and Design Commission, and making sure that those roles will be defined. And we will continue to work with the city attorney's office to ensure that those duties remain in effect as we move forward with these proposed changes. And I'll go back. A part of that too is just really to ensure that there's an integrated, holistic review process, again, for the department, but also for the community, so they know what to expect with these different applications, and to hopefully expedite things where it's appropriate. The community engagement background of this effort within this past year, as you can see, there are a variety of public meetings and facilitated discussions that the department has been a part of and have been included within this process. A standout one was last week, where the department helped to facilitate a joint meeting between the Design Review Board and the Planning Commission, which was based on feedback received at multiple points throughout the past year when this update process has been part of the discussion within these boards, just to see how those meetings would be run to help clarify the process and expectations for the different chairs. Of course, this most recent joint meeting still had 2 separate entities and 2 separate boards because that's what we have adopted and in place right now. With the proposed changes and it being consolidated to 1 board, it will run a little bit differently than what we saw last Monday, but the department is starting to try to continue to use that feedback received to see how to best move forward. The next steps anticipated for this process are, again, working out any kinks as possible within this process to clarify the expectations for the chairs who are on the design review board and the planning commission, and just really working to hone in on that new meeting process and the duties as a joint board while fulfilling all those requirements. The department's being very careful to consider all of the feedback received and reviewing our code language, making sure that we're giving adequate guidance and preparation for all of the commission board members throughout this process, because it is a learning curve for everyone. And we're hoping to just continue to provide support for the members throughout this reconfiguration. And we're hoping to get an ordinance through the process within this fall and winter. Again, that will go through the planning commission and their recommendation will be considered by council. Hopefully that ordinance and those red lines will be in effect by January of 2024. And the department has been really carefully doing this process, but as you have seen on the couple slides ago, there have been a variety of different conversations to hopefully not shock anyone with these red lines as they come through. And that is the first update. Are there any questions at this point for this?
Okay.
One thing I want to emphasize on this is very important is the reconfiguring the boards and commissions is not actually changing the standards that we review projects by. So a great heritage of expecting high quality development and applying design standards that makes it fit with in our community. We're not eliminating that. We're finding, like Lily mentioned, a way to integrate that better into the review process. Right now, there's this design conversation that happens and there's this sort of land use or development conversation, and they've been kind of split up. And we see this really as an opportunity to integrate those conversations to still get high quality projects, but do it in a way that avoids bouncing back and forth between a couple boards, a longer time frame than I think any of us want, and while still getting a high quality outcome. So I just want to make sure that that's clear. We're not compromising any of those standards or that heritage that Durango has and should be proud of, but doing it in a clearer and more effective way.
Yeah, look at a project holistically.
Yeah.
So the next update is on the city's parking code provisions within the Land Use and Development Code. A little bit of background, as was mentioned by Transportation Director, the Comprehensive Parking Management Plan was adopted in December of 2022. And part of that plan, among other things, yielded recommendations for updating the city's parking code and requirements. What we're specifically looking at right now are the various parking standards, the EV parking standards and regulations, as well as bike parking and multimodal infrastructure standards, as well as how to help incentivize those things specific to different character districts of Durango. And then making sure that recent parking code updates have been incremental, and we will continue to do that case sensitive, including those EV and multifamily parking standards, which were recently updated. So some of the people we're working with on this process, of course, the goals and the recommendations which have resulted through this comprehensive parking management plan to review this parking code are to simplify. And so we're working with Walker Consultants to update the city's parking standards within our land use code to help simplify those standards for development. We're looking at coordinating sustainability incentives and electric vehicle standards with Devin King, Marty Poole, Ryan Cornell for those EV regulations, as well as incentives for those multimodal parking infrastructure pieces around the city. And then, of course, aligning with adopted plans within the community. So ensuring that this code and the parking provisions and the regulations are in line with the city's transportation management plan, which will be newly adopted. The comprehensive parking management plan, which was newly adopted, the comprehensive plan and the strategic plan. So the parking code itself, we will have probably a separate red line for everyone to consider just because it's a fairly complicated instrument. But we're hoping that that recommended draft red line will go to the Planning Commission in late 2023. And some of the goals of that red line and the items of consideration within that process through the department have included, again, simplifying those parking tables and the changes of use standards, combining and updating parking reductions, standards in terms of affordable housing projects, and making sure that those are aligned with updated housing projects that we have, reviewing the parking fee and loop program, the EV standards in town, and the multimodal infrastructure and standards. The overarching goal really also within this red line is to increase residential and mixed use development and infill development in downtown and without negatively impacting adjacent uses, but just seeing where we can appropriately begin to figure out how to fix some of the parking code standards. Are there any questions on the parking code update?
Would you explain to me why we would need separate EV standards for parking? I mean, we've already provided more charging for them. Why would they need their own parking spots?
Sure, great question. I can maybe speak a little bit to it, although you can probably speak to it a little better.
I'm glad Marty came up. He's in the thick of this.
Dude.
But obviously it's anticipating the growth of those types of vehicles and trying to make sure we're out ahead of it as new development happens, instead of having to go back and retrofit new development in a very expensive way. But I'll let Marty flesh that out a little bit more.
Yeah, I think that's a great summary of the need. There's some clarification around definitions of the, how extensive the requirements around different infrastructure. So right now it just says charging stations, but you could install empty conduit in anticipation of having a charging station installed in the future, which is a relatively inexpensive thing to do when a development is already, there's just raw dirt and you haven't even paved the parking lot yet. It's relatively inexpensive to put that infrastructure in at the time. And also just essentially tracking the growth of EV use and the necessary types of infrastructure in different places around our community, because EV charging infrastructure isn't just one type of charger in one type of location. It's really a pretty monumental transformation of our driving and parking infrastructure as a global community, actually.
Oh, no, it doesn't, but it's a good explanation of why you would want to put infrastructure and to provide for something in the future. My concern is, why would we want to designate EV parking spaces and not designate regular gas parking spaces? It's not equitable.
I think this code update would speak to both. Not all spots will be EV charging spots. There's different management approaches you can take. And ultimately, this is looking forward on the trajectory. There are major manufacturers that have committed to not making a gasoline vehicle after 2035, which is less than 12 years away. And so as a community, if we are thinking ahead, planning for that with these codes, we have to acknowledge that there is a monumental shift in the type of vehicles that are being sold around the nation, and in Colorado specifically is leader in that space. So the code updates will be put before Planning Commission and put before Council, so you all can see the percentages that we're talking about and the type of how many spaces are going for what type of use. Certainly not every space will be an EV space by any means.
For those EV spaces, can I just ask a
Yeah,
question too.
sure.
Are we looking at best practices from other similar communities, especially Colorado being on the forefront of the EV, push and stuff? I'm assuming that we're taking that into account.
Yeah, definitely. Walker Consultants is a maybe international firm that's focused on parking. And so they can compare us to lots of other communities. Marty connected us with a professor out of Arizona State University that does a lot of work in this space. So yes, we're definitely looking at best practices. I think we've updated parking standards probably 2 or 3 times in the last 4 years, and EV has been a big piece of that. And same thing with how we approached ADUs. We're doing this incrementally. We're learning as we go. We're trying not to overstep and have to, scale back. And it's just the reality of, the new transportation options that we have is we need to plan for it and make sure that they're provided. So.
Thank you.
Any other questions from council? I don't see any, and I don't see Councilor Bosman's hands up. So I think you might have answered all our questions. Thank you so much for the presentation and for the effort. We appreciate it. Oh,
We have 2 more.
oh, two more phases. Okay.
Turn it over to Daniel, who will discuss the process.
I'll be quick. Thank you. Yep, this is topic 3 of 4, and there's actually 2 parts here, and this one is very familiar. If you remember, we talked back in May that we're bringing 2 process improvements for you. This one has to do with our public hearing process and right-sizing projects to make sure we're not taking too many things to hearing or multiple hearings. So we're still doing that. The goal is efficiency and effectiveness of our reviews. So we found examples in our code. We've taken this to the Code Alignment Working Group back in November. You all saw this topic in May. What we're going to do next is actually get red lines in front of you. And we think we can do that here and towards the end of the year. And early 2024, we'll then be able to then act on those red lines. And so we have 2 opportunities to bring this information back to you. This is really just an update to let you know that we're always working on refinement of our processes.
Great questions from council. I don't see any. Okay.
Who's driving? So I'll jump to my second topic. This is a little bonus item for you, 3B. This has to do with something you also saw back in May, to let you know that we are going to now do outreach with respect to updating our building permit fees, which are based on International Code Council valuations. We're operating under the 2013 ICC data tables, and we want to update those to 2023. So our next step here, as it says, I'll back up. We did go to the Code Alignment Working Group as well this year. You saw this in May, and we also took it to our Planning Commission. We got good feedback from those groups, and now we have information that we're ready to share with the public, our building and development community, that shows the changes from 2013 valuations to 2023 valuations. 3 examples that they can look at and see the differences of what it's going to cost in a single family home, multifamily, and a commercial application. So that's what's going to happen here in September. And we think we can bring these updates to you as early as November, December this year, with a target of an effective date, January 2024. The overall goal here is staying current, keeping our fees up to date. And we think that aligns well with the strategic plan goals of a highly functioning government that has good responsibility for its financial expenses and money in and money out. So that's the update from me on these 2 items.
Thank you. I think Councillor Bosmans has a question.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to check, you were still going to get an update on the fair share ordinance, correct?
If the mayor will let us.
Well, I'll just have a small question on the permit fees and the, I remember the last time you presented that as a suggested increase based on the increase in building cost, and referring to that, I can't remember the name, ICC or something, that type of abbreviation. But the actual language is that the the permit fees would be based on the recovery rate from the actual cost of the building department. And I just wanted to see if you had any more information on that, or if you want to run that through the whole process first, and then I have the same question from me, because I'm really curious to see on what the basis is for a permit fee increase, because I prefer not to see it just increase because all other costs for building and contractors are increasing.
Yeah, we can definitely plan to bring that information back to you as part of this package.
Okay.
The other thing that we've worked on since that conversation with council is linking this to improved service delivery. And this would allow us to get some new tools in place to improve the efficiency of the permit review process, the transparency of it. So we're trying to show that link. And I think our customers will really appreciate that. The increase is really marginal when compared to the overall cost of development. But if we can show improved service delivery, I think there will be a lot of support for it. So we'll plan to make that clear when we bring this back to council.
Thank you.
Sure. I'm assuming this will probably impact the fair share rebate program to some degree. Well, I mean, we'll still have the same rebates just with the new fee schedule.
That is a good, that might be a good segue. Or Scott. Do you wanna-
And yeah. Maybe just different programs. Building permit fees is what they pay when they are picking up their permit to actually start construction. Fair share program is part of their approval process. And the in lieu fee is an option for them at that stage. So maybe just they're different items.
Okay, sorry, I thought
Yeah.
I was under the impression that they were joined. So,
Yeah.
okay, thank you.
Oh, sure. Okay. Just one slide. Hi, Eva Henson, Housing Innovation Manager. I figured I'd leave a little bit of time for discussion and questions. I figured you might have quite a few of those possibly. The Fair Share program has been underway for just a couple of months. We kicked that program off with the project with Root Policy Research due to DOLA funding that we received last year to really look and analyze the program in its entirety. Part of the fix really is a two-prong approach to this, partly due to wanting to make the program more efficient, but also to be able to be more nimble and flexible with our program right now to establish public-private partnerships. Fair Share currently has there in our program that we can't provide third-party subsidies. As simple as that. That conflicts with our strategic plan and goals to provide and incentivize these types of projects. So we want to be able to utilize the funds that City Council has appropriated to the Housing Division and also incentivize these projects fair and equitably. And so sort of the first stage to that would be relatively simple to make some red line edits to that particular section that would also look at those development fee offsets. Be clear, consistent, and concise in how we handle our public-private partnerships, and also for the development side to understand what incentives are available to them. The second phase, of course, would be a much more robust overhaul to create a new program, also to include ownership and rental development within our inclusionary zoning authority. With that, of course, we included in our packet a timeline of where we're at with Root Policy. We're about 40% of the way there. Really, the most extensive work now comes after the feasibility and economic analysis part for the fee in lieu calibration. So we're really going to do some deeper work into that and the methodology. We also need to look at ways to alleviate more staff time. We want to reduce our staff work in this and making it more clear and concise on how we move forward with our inclusionary zoning program. As well as looking at what incentives we can provide for the development. And with that, we would be coming back before council similar to what the team members have shared. This would be in the fall with the first and second reading potentially later this year to adopt.
Great questions, council. Fair share. I think Council Bosman's, you said you had a question. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you for the brief update. You mentioned there's $120,000 DOLA grant. I think the city also pays 40,000. Was that it? Or the matching funds for the city was 40? Is that correct? Or do I have the numbers correct? Incorrect?
Yes, there was a local match requirement as part of the grant. Oh, okay. Yes, I believe it was a 20% match.
Okay. So I'm just very curious and eager to see what they're going to develop and present to us for that kind of money. So I look forward to that. I hope the fair share ordinance will be simple and straightforward so that builders and contractors are able to use it directly instead of having to hire another consultant to calculate and work with that requirement and make it work for them and their project. The other question I had is, are we, when we spoke about building permit fees, and there's different sources how the developers are incentivized to do affordable housing, and waiving fees is one of them, I understand. And can you remind council a little bit of how we track that? Because in the end, the building fees, I believe you mentioned this before, but I just want to refresh my memory as well. The building fees are actually paid towards the department that it goes to, and then refunded through the housing fund. Is that correct? So in the housing fund, you would be able to see all the expenses incurred or permit fees waived. So in one financial summary, is that correct? Or is there a way to make sure that we see all the incentives, and if it's direct money, it's direct money, if it's a waived fee, it's a waived fee, but to show everything in one department or a division? Or do you understand where I'm going? Or
Yes, I do. I would say, yes, the outcome for how we proceed moving forward with incentives would be for the developer often to pay those fees in whole. And then currently we would structure it that the housing fund would be rebating those fees. So it would show the fees coming in to those various funds. Some of those are enterprise funds. And so we would want to make sure that those are getting paid. And then the housing fund would show that expenditure going out as the rebate for that particular project for tracking purposes.
okay, great. Because I think at this point it's not as visible of how much we actually spend on affordable housing, workforce housing, all those things, because it has been a little bit mixed up, I guess, maybe is a good way to say it.
I would say we've used the last year and a half since the Housing Innovation Division was created to innovatively and creatively look at each project as an isolated case by case. I would say it's not always been efficient, but every project's been a little different. And we've tried to navigate complying with fair share that we have in place. And so often those fees had to be paid to comply. And then you could create a separate agreement for a public-private partnership. Animas City Park Overlook would have been one of those examples. I would say the Gage Apartments came in and asked for a minor fee waiver for building permit. So we've used some of these projects to inform how do we move forward and be consistent, set expectations, as well as create those incentives to be fair and equitable.
So if you have those summaries, would it be possible to share that? Like, let's pick the Animas apartments or the Gage Apartments, to show what exactly was invested or waived in total, what dollar value, and what we ended up getting back for it?
Yes, we could show what the public contribution was and the public benefit that was the tangible outcome from that particular project. Are you thinking that one just as an example, or would you want?
No, as an example. I think it would be just great to see how, if someone in our community asks, what did it really cost us? And then I can say, well, we spent, what is it, 600,000 to them, and as well as, I believe, permit waived permit fees, and I have no dollar value to that. So if whatever, $800,000 for six workforce units and 4 deed restricted units. I'm trying to remember exactly what it was. So that would be whatever, 80,000 per unit. And then they can have a good feeling about having that.
Yes, I think one of the things to keep in mind is that the fair share table is updated annually. So when we're looking at fee in lieu calibration and one particular partnership and what was created for that may not always be reciprocal to another project 2 years later due to those fee increases based on the current methodology for the calibration of the fee in lieu. So the Animas City Park Overlook worked for that scenario as well as the Urban Renewal Authority. So there were a couple of different layers to that project. But if I were to just look at a regular market rate project and try and incentivize that, the fee in lieu calibration is based on the set aside percentage of that housing development. So Animas City Park Overlook was 22 townhomes. If there's a larger development, 50 houses, it's going to skew what that partnership and incentive might look like, as well as all of those development fee costs, as well as the fee in lieu. So we have to kind of analyze that as apples and oranges a little bit because of the projects and when those are coming in and the size of the project.
And it doesn't mean we shouldn't do it just because it doesn't fit into that box. And I think that that's what's been really great to see over the last year and a half since you've been here, Eva, is like your creativity and using what the developers need, whether it's Animas Park Overlook or Gage Apartments, and then now creating this idea of hopefully what most can fit into, but also like the creativity that the community development department has and maintaining that flexibility. It doesn't have to fit into a box, I don't think. And so and it won't ever. And so I'm, applaud you for just trying to be creative and get, more affordable housing in the best ways we can. So thank you.
And one of the things, to keep in mind, I think with the fee in lieu, fair share in general has options. It's not just pay the fee. We really have build the units and we want to help incentivize that with these possible proposed changes so that we can use funding to help, leverage state funding, Prop 123 as an example that we've opted into, and other funding sources that were not available when fair share was originally implemented. Those things didn't exist. And the housing division didn't exist either. So we want to be able to leverage our public dollars creatively, innovatively, fair and equitable to help interject and get outcomes for affordable and workforce units.
I think it's so exciting. I would not push back though on knowing how much we've helped developers and what we've gotten in return to kind of just show that, because it's great numbers to show the community. So I would also, I think that information would be great if it's easy and streamlined way to get it and maintain it, just so we can kind of keep it up to date. So thank you.
Did we get through all the sections? Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for the presentation then finally at the conclusion, and we appreciate it. And with that, I think I'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. He's holding on. Oops.